The gentle rustle of autumn leaves breaks the silence at Arlington National Cemetery as a somber military honors ceremony begins. Today, we are looking at the extraordinary life of a K9 hero named Storm, a legend whose bravery echoed through history. Rows of pristine white headstones stand at attention, mirroring the rigid posture of the current K9 handlers gathered to pay their respects. Beside each uniformed handler sits a loyal German shepherd, perfectly still, as if understanding the immense weight of this gathering. At the center of the ceremony stands Maya, an elderly woman whose wrinkled, kind face carries a lifetime of profound memories. Dressed in a formal black mourning dress, her silver hair tied in a neat bun, Maya gazes at a beautifully polished wooden urn. A high-ranking military official steps forward with deep reverence, holding the prestigious Animals in War and Peace medal on a velvet cushion. He softly speaks of Storm's unparalleled courage in the humid jungles of Vietnam, a service that brought countless American soldiers home safely. Maya's trembling hands reach out to accept the posthumous medal on behalf of the faithful companion who lived out his twilight years by her side. As she gently runs her fingers over the cold metal, a solitary bugler raises his instrument, and the mournful notes of taps fill the air. On cue, the line of K9 handlers raises their hands in a crisp salute, honoring the legendary dog who finally succumbed to old age. A single tear escapes Maya's eye, tracing a path down her cheek as the haunting melody transports her mind far away from the cemetery. The modern world fades, replaced by the warm, nostalgic glow of a simple American porch bathed in the golden hour light of the 1960s. Maya's voiceover begins, a fragile whisper that carries us back to a time of innocence, long before the shadows of war touched her family. It all started with her brother, she recalls, her mind conjuring the image of a vibrant young man with an athletic build and warm smile. His name was Lucas, and he was the center of young Maya's universe, a protective older brother who always wore his signature plaid flannel shirt. In her memory, she is a 10-year-old girl again, her hair in messy pigtails, running through the yard in her vintage denim overalls. She remembers the fierce rainstorm that fateful afternoon, the way the sky darkened just before Lucas burst through the front door, soaked to the bone. Tucked safely inside his damp jacket was a shivering, clumsy-pawed German Shepherd puppy with a distinct dark saddle marking on his little back. Lucas had found the abandoned pup trapped in a flooded storm drain, saving his life and setting into motion a destiny none of them could foresee. Storm quickly became the beating heart of their home, growing rapidly from a clumsy, wet pup into a majestic and fiercely loyal German Shepherd. For young Maya, the playful dog was a constant, joyful playmate, but his true, unwavering loyalty always belonged solely to her older brother Lucas. The two companions were entirely inseparable, spending their endless summer days exploring the nearby woods and building a profound bond that seemed truly unbreakable. However, the warm, golden days of their peaceful childhood were soon heavily overshadowed by the dark, looming specter of the escalating Vietnam War. The heartbreaking, inevitable day finally arrived when Lucas stood firmly on the wooden front porch, hoisting a heavy green duffel bag over his broad shoulder. Young Maya clung desperately to her brother, hot tears streaming down her face, as Storm whined softly beside them, sensing the family's heavy sorrow. Lucas knelt down slowly, pressing his forehead gently against the dog's snout, whispering a quiet promise to return and asking him to protect little Maya. Things take a heartbreaking turn for the worse several months later, when an ominous, olive-green military vehicle slowly pulls into their quiet gravel driveway. Two solemn, unsmiling military officers step out of the vehicle, walking to the door to deliver the utterly devastating news that Lucas was killed in action. The entire world instantly shattered for young Maya. The vibrant, warm colors of her innocent childhood faded abruptly into an endless, suffocating, and numb gray. Storm, as if fully understanding the permanent absence of his beloved master, spent countless days lying quietly by the front door, waiting faithfully but in vain. It was during this incredibly dark, grieving period that Maya first learned about the military's K9 Corps and the vulnerable soldiers relying on working dogs. She vividly remembered how fiercely Lucas had loved his country, and how much he had desperately wanted to protect his fellow brothers in arms overseas. In a sudden moment of profound, painful clarity, our brave young protagonist decides to make the ultimate, heartbreaking sacrifice for the sake of others. She slowly realizes that Storm, with his sharp protective instincts and deep loyalty, could potentially save other soldiers' brothers from sharing Lucas's tragically fatal destiny. Maya sits at her desk, and pens a heartfelt, tear-stained letter to the United States Army, officially volunteering her beloved dog for active military service. The dreadful day, the rumbling transport truck finally arrives to take him away. The sky is bleak and overcast, perfectly mirroring the heaviness in her chest. She kneels down in the driveway dirt, throwing her small arms tightly around Storm's thick neck, burying her crying face deep into his fur one last time. "Go save them and bring them home," she whispers fiercely into his ear, before bravely handing the leather leash over to a quiet, sympathetic soldier. As the heavy truck rumbles away, taking the very last living piece of Lucas with it, young Maya stands completely alone on the quiet, empty road. The scene abruptly shifts to the loud, chaotic, and dusty grounds of an Army canine training camp, a stark contrast to the quiet suburbs. Storm, bewildered and surrounded by aggressive, barking dogs, is suddenly thrust into the harsh, demanding reality of intensive military preparation. Here we meet Jack, a young, tough soldier with a military buzz cut, who makes it perfectly clear he never wanted to be a dog handler. Assigned to each other by pure chance, the rebellious young soldier and the grieving, stubborn German shepherd immediately clash in the sweltering training yard. Jack pulls aggressively on the heavy canvas leash, deeply frustrated by the dog's absolute refusal to follow even the most basic tactical commands. Things take a turn when a mail call finally brings Jack a slightly crumpled, tear-stained envelope addressed in young Maya's careful, childish handwriting. Sitting on his narrow army cot, Jack reads the heartbreaking letter detailing how much the dog meant to her late brother, Lucas. Maya's innocent words beg the soldier to take good care of her beloved best friend, instantly melting the icy walls surrounding Jack's hardened heart. Looking deeply into the dog's intelligent amber eyes, Jack realizes they are both just lonely soldiers looking for a reliable friend in a harsh world. Our protagonist decides to change his approach entirely, replacing harsh military discipline with genuine affection, gentle praise, and shared moments of quiet understanding. Slowly but surely, the formidable German shepherd begins to trust his new handler, responding to Jack's commands with lightning speed and unmatched agility. However, a massive obstacle arises during a rigorous swamp crossing exercise, revealing Storm's deeply ingrained, paralyzing fear of deep, murky water. The terrified dog completely freezes at the riverbank, his mind instantly flashing back to the suffocating, flooded storm drain where Lucas had originally found him. While other cruel handlers openly mock the trembling animal, Jack refuses to give up, stepping slowly into the cold water and gently calling his name. Using boundless patience and an unwavering voice, Jack wades deeper into the rushing current, promising the frightened dog that he will never let him drown. Summoning every ounce of his courage, Storm finally leaps into the muddy water, paddling furiously against the strong current to reach his loyal partner's side. The triumphant moment officially cements an unbreakable bond between man and beast, proving they are fully ready to face the unimaginable horrors of combat together. With their intensive training completely finished, Jack and his newly minted K9 partner board a massive, deafening transport plane bound for the jungles of Vietnam. The humid atmospheric haze of Southeast Asia hits them instantly, as the roaring aircraft doors open to reveal their dangerous new reality. Stepping off the metal ramp into the sweltering heat, they march directly toward the dense, unforgiving jungle, where their true, harrowing test will finally begin. Upon arriving at the forward operating base, Jack and Storm are immediately thrust into the chaotic, terrifying realities of active jungle warfare. They are quickly assigned to a seasoned reconnaissance squad commanded by Sergeant Miller, a relentlessly strict officer who demands absolute perfection. Sergeant Miller takes one dismissive, agonizingly long look at the panting German shepherd and makes his profound distrust of the animal painfully clear. The rigid officer harshly informs Jack that he survives by relying solely on human tactics, completely refusing to trust the lives of his men to a dog. Jack bites his tongue and fiercely grips the heavy canvas leash, silently vowing that his loyal partner will inevitably prove the skeptical sergeant wrong. Early the very next morning, the heavily armed squad embarks on a highly dangerous patrol deep into the suffocating foliage of enemy territory. The humid heat is absolutely oppressive, the thick air swarming with biting insects, and the constant, paralyzing threat of a sudden ambush. Storm confidently takes the dangerous point position, his amber eyes sharply scanning the dense brush, while his highly sensitive nose aggressively works the air. Jack follows closely behind his K9 partner, his rifle at the ready, choosing to trust the dog's sharp instincts over his own exhausted human senses. Things suddenly take a terrifying turn when Storm abruptly stops dead in his tracks, his entire muscular body going completely rigid on the narrow dirt path. The dog's ears pin back as he lets out a low, vibrating growl, raising his right paw slightly and refusing to take another single step forward. Sergeant Miller aggressively marches up from the rear of the patrol line, furiously whispering at Jack to push the stubborn dog forward immediately. However, our brave protagonist outright refuses the direct, aggressive order, physically stepping in front of the furious sergeant to stubbornly defend his dog's warning. He fiercely whispers that the dog has caught a dangerous scent, pointing his trembling finger toward a seemingly empty, innocent-looking thicket of green bamboo. Reluctantly, a frustrated Miller signals the anxious squad to halt their advance and silently take defensive cover behind the massive trunks of fallen jungle trees. Jack carefully lowers himself to his stomach and slowly crawls forward through the wet mud, his eyes desperately searching the ground directly ahead of Storm. Barely visible beneath a thick layer of dead, rotting jungle leaves, Jack spots the deadly, metallic glint of a nearly invisible wire stretched tightly across the trail. It is a meticulously hidden, highly volatile, explosive booby trap, perfectly designed to instantly wipe out the entire American squad the second they crossed it. The color completely drains from Sergeant Miller's stern face as he steps forward and slowly realizes the massive, fatal mistake he had almost commanded them to make. In that incredibly tense moment, Storm undeniably proved his immense worth, single-handedly saving the lives of every single soldier on that terrifying jungle patrol. Following that terrifyingly close call, the entire dynamic of the seasoned reconnaissance squad fundamentally and permanently shifts. The incredibly battle-hardened soldiers, who had once openly mocked the German Shepherd, now look at him with deep, profound reverence. They eagerly share their meager combat rations with him, gently patting his thick fur whenever they stop to rest in the oppressive heat. Even the rigidly stubborn Sergeant Miller silently acknowledges the dog's immense value, officially allowing Jack and Storm to permanently lead their dangerous patrols. However, the brutal, deeply unforgiving reality of the Vietnam War ensures their brief moments of peace are always violently interrupted. Weeks into their grueling jungle deployment, the exhausted squad is tasked with investigating a highly suspicious, heavily fortified enemy supply depot. As they slowly and silently approach the dense perimeter, Storm's ears suddenly pin flat back, his body language signaling an imminent, massive threat. Before Jack can fully shout a desperate verbal warning, the dense green jungle canopy completely erupts into chaotic, deafening enemy gunfire. Things take a disastrous turn for the worse as heavy mortar fire rains down from the sky, violently throwing American soldiers into the deep mud. The entire squad is hopelessly pinned down by relentless machine gun fire, completely surrounded by invisible enemies, heavily hidden in the thick brush. Amidst the blinding grey smoke and terrifying battlefield chaos, our brave protagonist realizes their absolute only chance of survival is an emergency extraction. But the squad's designated radio operator is severely wounded, lying completely helplessly in an open mud clearing, heavily saturated with flying enemy bullets. Knowing he absolutely cannot leave his injured comrade to die, Jack intensely locks eyes with his incredibly loyal K9 partner. With a fierce, wildly desperate shout over the gunfire, Jack aggressively points forward, commanding Storm to charge directly into the terrifying crossfire. Without a single moment of hesitation, the courageous German Shepherd violently launches his muscular body entirely into the deadly, bullet-riddled clearing. Wet dirt and jagged debris aggressively explode all around the running dog as he sprints with unmatched, blinding speed through the chaotic battlefield. Storm miraculously reaches the fallen, bleeding soldier, violently grabbing the heavy canvas strap of the military radio tightly in his powerful jaws. He forcefully drags the heavy equipment backward through the thick jungle mud, enemy bullets violently tearing through the green leaves, mere inches from his head. The heroic dog successfully returns the radio directly to Jack, collapsing heavily into the dirt, completely exhausted but miraculously uninjured. Jack furiously grabs the plastic handset, desperately calling in their exact jungle coordinates for an immediate helicopter dust-off, praying loudly they can survive. Minutes later, the distinct, heavy thumping of helicopter blades violently cuts through the deafening gunfire, signaling the miraculous arrival of their emergency extraction. A massive, olive-green Huey helicopter aggressively descends into the chaotic jungle clearing, its powerful rotors whipping the thick mud and grey smoke into a blinding hurricane. Sergeant Miller frantically waves his arms, aggressively ordering the battered and bleeding soldiers to immediately fall back toward the incredibly dangerous, exposed landing zone. Jack intensely grips his rifle with one hand and heavily yanks Storm's canvas leash with the other, sprinting desperately through the blinding dust storm. The terrifying heat of the intense enemy crossfire violently grazes their bodies as the desperate squad aggressively scrambles up the metal ramp of the hovering chopper. Inside the incredibly cramped, vibrating cabin, terrified medics frantically drag severely wounded soldiers aboard, leaving absolutely no room for anyone or anything else. As Jack violently lifts his heavy German Shepherd toward the open metal door, the panicked helicopter pilot aggressively screams over the deafening engine noise. The desperate pilot fiercely shakes his head, loudly shouting that the aircraft is dangerously overloaded and completely forbidding the large animal from coming aboard. Sergeant Miller aggressively blocks the open door with his rigid body, forcefully ordering Jack to immediately abandon the dog in the muddy landing zone. The stern officer harshly yells that military working dogs are strictly classified as expendable equipment, violently demanding that Jack leave him behind to save human lives. Storm sits perfectly still in the chaotic mud, his amber eyes looking up at Jack with profound, unwavering trust amidst the terrifying rain of bullets. The completely unacceptable thought of violently betraying the courageous dog, who just saved all their lives, causes something inside Jack's hardened mind to instantly snap. In a sudden, incredibly violent burst of pure adrenaline and absolute rage, Jack aggressively drops his heavy rifle onto the muddy jungle floor. Our desperate protagonist violently grabs Sergeant Miller by the heavy fabric of his crisp uniform collar, aggressively slamming the officer back against the metal chopper frame. Jack's eyes burn with an intense, terrifying fire as he fiercely screams directly into the stunned sergeant's face, absolutely refusing the direct military order. No one gets left behind. Jack violently roars over the deafening helicopter rotors, his heavily muscled forearm fiercely pressing against the rigid officer's chest. The entirely shocked and utterly terrified, Sergeant Miller slowly raises his hands in absolute surrender, frantically nodding his head to allow the dog aboard. Without wasting another precious second, Jack violently hauls the incredibly heavy German Shepherd directly into the cramped helicopter cabin, pulling him tightly to his chest. The massive helicopter immediately pitches forward, violently ascending into the hazy grey sky as deadly enemy tracer bullets viciously tear through the empty mud below. Sitting safely on the vibrating metal floor, Jack intensely buries his incredibly sweaty face into Storm's thick fur, finally allowing himself to breathe. Upon safely returning to the fortified American base, Jack fully expects to be immediately court-martialed for his violent insubordination against a superior officer. He sits quietly in the dim, damp brig, his hands resting heavily on his knees, while Storm paces anxiously outside the chain-link holding cell. The heavy metal door suddenly creaks open, revealing a heavily bandaged Sergeant Miller stepping slowly into the dim, shadowy room with a serious expression. Instead of delivering severe military punishment, the notoriously strict officer looks down at the dog and then back up at Jack with a respectful nod. Miller quietly informs the stunned soldier that his official combat report states the dog was absolutely critical for squad morale and safely loaded under standard protocol. In a profound moment of silent understanding, the two vastly different men acknowledge the immense, undeniable heroism of the loyal German Shepherd between them. As the grueling months of their dangerous combat tour slowly bleed into a full year, Jack and Storm survive countless more terrifying jungle patrols together. Their legendary reputation rapidly spreads throughout the entire muddy encampment, universally known as the unbreakable duo who always brought their squad home safely. Finally, the incredibly long-awaited day arrives when Jack proudly receives his highly anticipated honorable discharge papers, officially ending his terrifying tour of duty. However, a heartbreaking military policy aggressively dictates that heroic working dogs are incredibly rarely allowed to return to peaceful civilian life in the United States. Most incredibly brave K9 heroes are tragically left behind in Southeast Asia, officially abandoned as surplus military equipment despite their immense, life-saving sacrifices. Jack completely refuses to accept this devastating fate, fiercely utilizing every single favor he has earned from high-ranking officers to desperately secure Storm's safe passage. Sergeant Miller himself shockingly steps forward, aggressively leveraging his significant military influence to officially reclassify the legendary dog as medically unfit for further combat service. The bureaucratic miracle is finally achieved, instantly granting the incredibly heroic German Shepherd a highly unusual, fully authorized military flight back to peaceful American soil. Jack and his incredibly loyal canine partner board a massive silver transport plane, heavily leaving the humid, terrifying jungles of Vietnam far behind them forever. As the massive airplane glides smoothly over the sparkling blue ocean, Jack slowly pulls the crumpled, tear-stained letter from young Maya entirely out of his pocket. He looks down affectionately at the deeply exhausted dog sleeping peacefully across his dirty boots, intimately knowing he has one final, incredibly important mission left. He absolutely must return this magnificent, heroic animal to the heartbroken little girl who so selflessly offered him to fiercely save American lives in combat. The harsh, incredibly gritty colors of the violent 1970s war suddenly fade away, replaced once again by the warm, nostalgic, golden glow of peaceful American suburbia. Jack slowly steps out of a dusty yellow taxi, holding the heavy canvas leash tightly as he stares nervously at the deeply familiar wooden front porch. Jack stands perfectly still at the very edge of the dusty gravel driveway, his heart pounding heavily as he stares at the familiar, quiet house. Storm immediately recognizes the distinct scent of his peaceful childhood home, his fuzzy ears perking straight up as his thick tail begins a rapid, rhythmic wag. The old wooden screen door suddenly squeaks open, and young Maya slowly steps out onto the sun-drenched porch, her face looking older and deeply sorrowful. She completely freezes in her tracks on the wooden steps, her incredibly wide eyes instantly locking onto the massive German Shepherd standing beside the strange soldier. Storm lets out a single, incredibly sharp and joyful bark, violently pulling the heavy canvas leash entirely out of Jack's relaxed grip. The majestic, battle-hardened dog sprints wildly up the grassy front yard, his powerful muscular legs carrying him frantically back to the little girl he left behind. Maya violently drops directly to her knees in the tall green grass, heavy tears instantly streaming down her face as the massive dog aggressively crashes into her open arms. She buries her crying face deeply into his incredibly thick neck fur, sobbing completely uncontrollably as Storm frantically covers her wet cheeks with eager, sloppy kisses. Jack slowly walks up the long gravel driveway, an incredibly profound, heavy sense of absolute peace completely washing over him as he watches the beautiful reunion. He gently lowers himself to one knee directly beside the weeping little girl, softly placing his rough, heavily dirt-stained hands squarely on her incredibly small shoulder. He softly whispers to Maya that her beloved dog absolutely kept his promise to Lucas, fiercely saving countless American soldiers in the terrifying, dark jungle. Jack's rough voice suddenly breaks heavily with intense emotion as he sincerely tells her that Storm was the absolute best, most courageous soldier he ever knew. He incredibly gently presses the worn heavy canvas leash entirely back into young Maya's small, trembling hands, officially returning the brave hero to his rightful family. With one final, incredibly lingering, and deeply emotional look at his loyal canine partner, Jack slowly turns away and quietly begins the long walk down the empty street. The warm, incredibly nostalgic golden image of the 1970s suburban yard slowly begins to dissolve entirely, gracefully transitioning back to the crisp, modern reality of Arlington National Cemetery. Elderly Maya stands perfectly still in the somber present day, heavily holding the gleaming golden medal incredibly close to her mourning heart as the autumn wind gently blows. A peaceful, incredibly knowing smile finally breaks through her flowing tears, intimately knowing that Storm lived a long, deeply happy life, entirely surrounded by unwavering love. She slowly looks entirely down at the beautifully polished wooden urn, incredibly gently tracing her wrinkled, shaking fingers over the engraved brass nameplate. One final, loving time. The incredibly majestic, unforgettable legacy of the courageous canine hero who miraculously bridged the tragic gap between a fallen brother and a grieving sister will never fade. As the profoundly somber notes of the military bugle completely fade entirely into the cool autumn breeze, the screen slowly, respectfully cuts to absolute black. Though the solemn ceremony at Arlington marked the official end of his story, Storm's beautiful life after the war deserves to be remembered. Following that incredibly tearful reunion on the sun-drenched porch, the battle-hardened German Shepherd finally learned how to just be a normal dog again. He traded the terrifying sounds of artillery fire and chaotic helicopter extractions for the gentle, entirely peaceful chirping of suburban neighborhood birds. Young Maya made it her absolute life's mission to ensure her beloved companion never experienced another single moment of fear or profound anxiety. She spent countless golden afternoons throwing worn tennis balls across the incredibly green, sun-drenched grass, slowly healing the invisible wounds of his combat. Even as the seasons rapidly passed, and Maya slowly grew older, the incredibly loyal dog never left her side, always sleeping faithfully nearby. He became a deeply beloved fixture in their quiet suburban neighborhood, widely known by all the local children as the incredibly gentle giant. However, the incredibly heavy toll of his rigorous military service eventually began to catch up with the immensely powerful, majestic animal's aging body. His once blindingly fast sprints across the grassy yard slowly turned into highly deliberate, incredibly careful walks beside his deeply devoted human companion. On a remarkably quiet, entirely peaceful autumn evening, the legendary K9 hero finally closed his highly intelligent amber eyes for the very last time. He passed incredibly peacefully in his sleep, completely surrounded by the entirely warm, incredibly unwavering love of the little girl he had fiercely protected. The profound heartbreak of losing him completely devastated Maya all over again, echoing the terrifyingly painful day she had lost her brother, Lucas. But instead of entirely succumbing to the suffocating grief, our incredibly brave protagonist violently channeled her immense pain into a truly noble, lifelong purpose. She vividly remembered the incredibly dark, utterly depressing military kennels Jack had described, where deeply heroic dogs were tragically abandoned as mere surplus equipment. Maya furiously dedicated her entire adult life to aggressively fighting the incredibly rigid military bureaucracy that entirely allowed such a heartbreaking betrayal to happen. She heavily lobbied powerful government officials and aggressively wrote thousands of passionate letters, fiercely demanding safe passage home for all retiring military working dogs. Her incredibly tireless, intensely passionate advocacy eventually led to the official establishment of a highly successful National Rescue Foundation entirely in Storm's legendary name. This incredibly vital organization miraculously funded the incredibly expensive, highly complicated transport flights required to entirely bring forgotten canine heroes back to American soil. Countless heavily exhausted, deeply traumatized military dogs were officially given incredibly loving retirement homes entirely because of the promise Maya made to her fallen dog. The profoundly life-saving legacy of one incredibly brave German shepherd entirely rippled through history, miraculously saving thousands of his fellow four-legged brothers in arms. As our incredibly moving story finally comes to a close, we are powerfully reminded of the immense, unbreakable bonds forged in the darkest fires of war. Maya's extraordinary journey, from a heartbroken little girl to a fiercely passionate advocate, completely changed the tragic fate of countless American military working dogs. The deeply heroic German shepherd named Storm did so much more than just save a single pinned-down squad in the terrifying jungles of Vietnam. He entirely healed the profoundly shattered heart of a grieving family, miraculously bridging the terrifying void left by the tragic loss of Lucas. Back in the incredibly somber present day, elderly Maya stands proudly in Arlington National Cemetery, the crisp autumn wind gently rustling her silver hair. She looks incredibly closely at the highly prestigious Animals in War and Peace medal, its golden surface catching the bright, fading afternoon sunlight. She intensely remembers the incredibly brave soldier, Jack, who completely risked his entire military career to fiercely bring her beloved dog safely home. She stands perfectly in silence, incredibly deeply united in spirit, with every extraordinarily courageous handler who entirely fought alongside these majestic animals. She looks entirely down at the beautifully engraved wooden urn, entirely knowing that Storm's incredibly courageous spirit has finally found absolute, eternal peace. In the entirely quiet, profoundly peaceful depths of her incredibly loving heart, Maya intimately knows that her brother and his incredibly loyal dog are finally reunited. She envisions a beautifully sun-drenched, entirely endless golden field, where a vibrant, incredibly athletic, young Lucas joyfully throws a worn tennis ball into the sky. And bounding entirely happily through the incredibly tall green grass is Storm, entirely completely freed from the incredibly heavy burdens of war and old age. The incredibly heroic dog finally returns precisely to the fiercely loving master who pulled him incredibly freezing and entirely trembling from that flooded storm drain. Their profoundly beautiful, incredibly timeless sacrifice serves as a truly incredibly powerful reminder that absolute true loyalty completely entirely transcends both time and death. The majestic, completely unforgettable legacy of the incredibly brave K9 Corps will entirely forever echo through the incredibly quiet, hallowed grounds of American history. No incredibly loyal soldier, whether they remarkably walk on 2 legs or fiercely run on 4, should ever be tragically left completely behind. This has been the deeply emotional, incredibly unforgettable true story of Storm, the extraordinarily brave military working dog who became an absolute legend. If this incredibly powerful, entirely heartbreaking tale of absolute loyalty and fierce courage deeply moved you today, please respectfully leave a comment down below. Don't forget to incredibly gently hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and entirely ring the bell to never entirely miss another incredible recap. Until our very next incredibly unforgettable cinematic journey, hold your intensely beloved, incredibly loyal furry friends close and always completely remember our heroes.